Hello, my name is Julie and I'm here to talk about the books that I read in December. So yes, I will be doing my top books of 2022, but I still need to ruminate on it. I haven't really narrowed it down quite enough to a number that I'm good with. I never go off of I want a top 10 or a top whatever. I just go off of vibes, and I haven't thought about it enough to have the right number for the vibes. Spoiler, one of them might be in this video. So I read 11 books in December. At the beginning I wasn't able to read very much because of finals and all that, but the rest of the month I was able to read as much as I'd like. I read a little bit of everything in terms of genre and medium, but I only have one book physically on me because all my physical books were returned to the library or they're back at home. So as I said, I read 11 books for a total of 4,071 pages, which is in the higher end of the page counts for this year. And then I had an average rating of 3.89, which is the second highest of the entire year, which fantastic. Love to see it. If I have any more stats to show you, they're right here. But the first book that I read was Fool Me Once by Ashley Winstead. So Ashley Winstead wrote my favorite book of the year, so I wanted to read her other titles, and she writes both thriller and romance, one a year, so this is her first romance published. This is a contemporary romance about our main character, Lee Stone, who occasionally goes by Stoner. She's not your average rom-com protagonist. She is working at a female-run electric car company, and she wants to pass this bill that will make Texas, her home state, more green, and she's very passionate about that. But on the other side, she's also a party girl. She will drink you under the table. She is no stranger to a good time. She is also not into having long-term relationships anymore because she has only had experience with men cheating. And it got to the point with her college boyfriend that she thought he was cheating, so she ended up cheating on him with his rival. Turns out he wasn't cheating, and that incident absolutely destroyed his law school entry exam, and he ran away to California. But now, as she is trying to get this bill passed, it turns out the guy who's working with the governor that she is trying to convince is that ex-boyfriend, Ben, and they start a little competition to see who can get more backers for their bill. So this was like a really interesting setting and subject for a rom-com, definitely different than anything I've read, and I really liked Lee as a main character because she isn't the cookie cutter perfect girl, and I think a lot of what Ashley Winstead was wanting to do with this book is show that a lot of men are forgiven for a lot of their wrongdoings and women have to apologize and like step down. I liked the integration of spicy scenes through dreams, so the characters actually weren't moving that fast, but we still had the spice. And I just really liked a lot of the messages that Ashley Winstead had here. My problem with this book, however, is that it was just Lee's perspective, and this is about a person who cheated on another person. I could see why Lee was interested in Ben again, because he didn't do anything wrong in the past. I would have liked to see Ben's perspective, to see how he is feeling and him going over that obstacle. It kind of felt like that was almost skipped over. There was a lot of repetitive scenes in terms of Lee running away from a situation and Ben following her outside. They even call attention to it. They point it out in the book, but that being the specific situation several times in a row was a little weird. So overall, I gave this a 3.5. I'm really down for Ashley Winstead's writing and themes and characters. I just think particularly this one with the cheating plot made it less for me. Then I read The Queen of Cursings by S.M. Gaither. I listened to this on audiobook. I essentially just picked this up on a whim after listening to a bit of it, but I actually had never heard of this book before I started listening to it. This is about a world in which there are 15 different gods who all have different selected people in this world that are all marked, and people who are marked have specific powers. And there's this kingdom empire that has cracked down on the Serpent clan, the people who were chosen by the Serpent God, because they're supposedly evil. These people are supposed to be no longer around, but our main character was smuggled away by her mother and is hiding the fact that she is a Serpent clan person. But then something happens where she gets revealed to be a Serpent person. She gets sent to the palace of, you know, the regime that is trying to wipe out all her people. I really liked the first opening chapter when it's the prologue where we're following her mother. I thought that was the most interesting part of the book. I liked that we're having this sort of militia coup in the small town that she was in. But once we left the small town, I was less invested in the story. Our main character is a very traditional YA female protagonist, and she runs into the prince, and they end up joining forces even though they hate each other, and it's very stock enemies to lovers, which was a little disappointing to me. I'm also unsure if this is supposed to be YA or adult. I was getting more adult vibes from the Audible page, but from the Goodreads page, I got more of a YA vibe. And the longer we went into the book and the more stock the enemies to lovers was, it became a little bit more YA. But I just, that relationship didn't do it for me. And also I realized that the magic system is essentially cutie marks from My Little Pony, which I kept thinking about and laughing. So this wasn't necessarily for me. Something about this really missed the mark. So I gave this a 2-star. Then for my book club, 3 of Clubs, the last book we read for our magic school quarter was Vita Nostra by Marina and Sergei Dyachenko. This is a translated novel. It's about our main character, Sasha, who is in high school at the beginning of this. She starts getting stalked by this adult man who then tells her if she doesn't complete these tasks that he tells her to do, that bad things will happen to her mother and her family. So she does what he says and gets a little gold coin, and eventually this goes on for long enough that she's about to graduate high school and he's like, hey, you are now going to go to this Institute of Special Technologies, this school that nobody has ever heard of, and if you don't, we're gonna hurt your family. So she ends up going because she doesn't have a choice, and she is learning, and at this school, none of the kids know what's going on. They're having absolutely impossible lessons where they're having to do these mental exercises that don't make any sense. And while everybody else is really struggling, Sasha's the only one who is thriving in this environment. This is one of the most unique books I've read. I feel like I say that a lot, but this is so weird. While reading it, I felt like it was a little bit too long and sometimes repetitive, but I feel like if I reread it and maybe looking back at it in retrospect, I might have seen more of the functions of those parts. And this just had the strangest resolution that you could possibly think of. I thought it was a metaphor at first. No, that's actually the answer. You don't get answers to the questions until towards the end, but as the magic picks up and you get more answers, you're just kind of floored. This is one of the weirder books that I've read, and I don't think it'll be for everyone, but I think that every single person will be absolutely surprised by the ending. Because what the fuck? If you have read this book, please talk to me, because I don't know what to think anymore. But overall, I had a pretty good time with this, so I ended up giving this around a 4-star. I think mostly for that ending. Then I read The Disordered Cosmos by Shonda Prescott Weinstein. This is a nonfiction about science and physics, but mostly critiquing the scientific community. She is one of the few Black women with a PhD in physics, and she is an astrophysicist working at a university. And it is her story of her interaction with the scientific community as a whole, and how it is a hierarchy, and how white cis straight men are pushed to the top, how there is violence and rape culture melded into the society, how women and people of color and queer people are pushed down, and the colonial past and present of the scientific community. It bounced around a lot between different types of subjects that we were covering. Was under the impression that there was going to be a little bit more science. I have studied physics for the last 5 years. I was a little let down by the scientific content because it was, for the most part, all stuff that I was familiar with. But for someone who hasn't studied it as much, that might be more interesting, but it is more about the social justice side of things. This is a hard book to discuss, and definitely I don't rate nonfiction, but if I did, I wouldn't rate this one either, because I feel like I don't have all of the language to talk about it. If you're a part of the scientific community or a person in STEM, I think that this is a book that could give you a lot to think about. Then I had possibly my most unpopular opinion of the month, maybe even the year. I read Milkfed by Melissa Broader. This is about our main character, Rachel, who is a lapsed Jew. Her mother played a very controlling part in her life, particularly when she was still in their house as a teenager. And she instilled a eating disorder in Rachel, which has essentially been her religion for years into her adulthood, that she obsessively does not eat very much and plans out how little she is going to eat. At the same time that her therapist says maybe it would be a good idea for you to take a break from your mom, she also runs into this woman, Miriam, who is also Jewish. She is fat, and they start having a relationship, and these two things combine to really question Rachel's skewed worldview with being skinny and being tiny and not eating. As someone who has had a little bit of experience with disordered eating, this book, especially in the beginning, was occasionally hard to read. I listened to the audiobook of it and listened to it in 2 sittings while I was working on Christmas stuff. I didn't want to put it down. I wanted to just keep listening to it. Rachel has a messed up mind because of all of the influences in her life, and this is the story of her getting out of that hole. And it's not always linear progress. Although she really cares for Miriam, sometimes she's projecting her own thoughts onto Miriam, who is a fat woman, about how, at least I'm skinnier, which is so opposite of how she actually feels about Miriam as a person. She is not a great person a lot of the time, and she doesn't really realize that she's working on making herself better throughout this book. The language was so specific and strange in a way that will alienate a lot of readers. I've heard this described as darkly funny. This book just kind of astonished me, and I will be thinking about the writing style and Rachel's journey, even when it wasn't good, for a long time. So if the subject matter is something that you can comfortably read and you like weird books, I feel like if you're a horror reader and can handle that type of language and writing style, this is a literary fiction that might be good for you. So I gave this a 5-star. I knew I was gonna love it or hate it, and I loved it. Then I read Leviathan Wakes by James S.A. Corey. This is the first book in the Expanse series that the sci-fi show was based on. So this is like a 10-book space opera epic sci-fi story, where this first book is essentially the inciting incident. So this is almost a little bit more insular than I think the rest of the books are going to be. Humanity has conquered the solar system, we have colonized it all, and Earth and Mars are the big powers, while the blue-collar workers are the people who live they're called the Belters, who live farther out in the solar system, and they're taller because they're living in less gravity, they're smaller. But there has been a lot of tension building between these two groups of people, and our main character, Jim Holden, is on a ship. They're doing this reconnaissance mission to see what's wrong with this abandoned ship, when the main ship that he's on is blown up out of nowhere. It was a civilian ship that seems to have been bombed by the Mars Navy. He broadcasts it to the entire solar system, and that basically starts a huge war. And at the same time, Detective Miller, farther out in the belt, has been assigned a missing person case that seems to be related with that abandoned ship that they were investigating, and he thinks that these two incidents might be more tied together than he thought. This is so fun. This is like adult Illuminae. Like, this is giving me the same vibes of action, survival, teamwork, of trying to figure out these large political spheres while being just a small person yourself. The tone was just right. There was some comedy along with all of this. I like the juxtaposition of our two heroes in this book. There's the anti-hero cop character, while there's also the classic loyal hero. And also there's a character named Julie, which you don't see very often, so I think that gave it a bonus point. Generally, I just had a lot of fun with this, and I think that this is going to be a very great starting point for a series that I am going to love. So I've given this 5 stars, 4.75. It's like real close there. I think once I get more attached to these characters specifically, it's gonna be 5 stars all the way. Super excited to continue in this series. Then I read Daphne by Josh Malerman. There are a couple of horror books that have been recommended to me recently by the other horror people on Instagram that I found, and this was one of them. This is a 2022 release, and it's about this small town called Samhattan where this girls' basketball team just won their tournament, and our main character, Kit, should be super excited about it, but she cannot stop thinking about this urban legend that there was this outcast named Daphne who was killed, and her ghost has come back and started haunting people, and she's just afraid that this girl is going to come after her, even though she thinks that this is not a reasonable fear to have. Then people on her basketball team start being killed, and she believes that she is going to be killed next. And we also follow a police officer who is trying to investigate what's going on. I felt like this was a classic slasher. This is a little bit more on the thriller side in terms of tone because we have that police officer perspective, but this is overall a metaphor for anxiety, which I thought was really interesting. How anxiety and thought spirals can just take over your mind. So I liked the metaphorical side of it, but I was less of a fan of the actual supernaturally mystery side of that. I had a good time with it. It was quick. I got through it really fast, but not a new favorite, so I gave it a 3.5. It also made me really consider why so many male authors are always writing horror that stars women. Then I read These Violent Delights by Chloe Gong. This is a historical, little bit of fantasy, romancy book that is a reimagining of Romeo and Juliet, which I'm a big Shakespeare fan, so I was very happy to finally pick this up. So this takes place in 1920s Shanghai. There are 2 different gangs. There's the Scarlet Gang, which is run by a longtime Shanghai family, and then there's the White Flowers, who are comprised of people who have moved here from different countries, run by a Russian family. So Juliet is the heir of the Scarlet Clan, and Roma is the heir of the White Flower Clan, and previously they were in a relationship, but then Roma betrayed Juliet, and she went off to America for several years, and now she's back. That situation has been difficult for the 2 of them, but they realize that the 2 of them need to work together because they're the only people in power who seem to be worried about this illness or monster or something that is taking over Shanghai, where people are starting to rip out their own throats, and there doesn't seem to be a discernible reason why, except bugs keep showing up at the site. It's really surprised me that my favorite part was the writing style. I think it sets it in Shanghai in the 1920s really well, and also is an homage to Shakespeare in itself. I really loved Juliet as a character. She's a badass, and not always in a good way. She doesn't really shirk at violence anymore because of the experiences that she's had and the betrayals that have been done to her. And then Roma is more of the sweetie and like does shirk at those things. That is very true to Romeo and Juliet, and some things that people don't get is that Romeo is the softie. I really like the characters that we follow around both of them, and I liked the mystery around this monster or whatever it is. I would have liked a little bit more of their romantic backstory. We get how they met, but not necessarily in flashbacks. Well, I love a second chance romance, but I really want to see the first chance, like why they started becoming attracted to each other. Her future title, Immortal Longings, is the reason why I became interested in Chloe Gong in the first place, and I know that's also Shakespeare-y, so I am just really ready to see how she's grown more as an author and excited to see where more Shakespeare type stories go. So I gave this a 4-star as well. And then surprisingly, I read another nonfiction, and that was I'll Be Gone in the Dark by Michelle McNamara. This is a true crime book about the Golden State Killer. Michelle McNamara was a blogger, a writer, did the True Crime Diary website, and was very popular with the amount of detail that she went into, how she started investigating herself, but also how humanely she handled these really difficult things and how everything was a tribute to these victims and wanting to get justice for them. And she heard about this case where there's the East Area rapist and later the original Night Stalker, which they figured out were actually one man. So she was the one who named him the Golden State Killer and brought a lot of attention to the case, which that attention, that popularization of the case, so it became a household name, was what led to his capture. It's not necessarily the contents of this book specifically, but it's the passion and drive that she had for this case. She essentially became obsessed with it to the point at which she was on a lot of anxiety medication and had an undiagnosed heart condition and ended up dying before the book was finished or he was caught. This book is completed by some editors. There's the HBO series that involves the actual capture of the culprit. Michelle's writing is so enthralling, and she is such a powerful writer and does a lot of justice to the victims, painting a picture of who this person could be, who could do all these terrible things. So I don't rate nonfiction, but this is something that is going to be on my mind for a very, very long time. And then I read Mother Thing by Ainsley Hogarth. This was recommended to me by some of my horror friends as well. This has just got the weirdest cover ever, and it does actually match how weird this book is. Abby and Ralph are a married couple. Ralph's mother has had lifelong mental health issues, and they are getting worse, so Ralph and Abby end up moving in with her, and at the very beginning of this book, his mother ends up taking her own life, and that absolutely shakes the foundation of Ralph's world and Abby's world through association. And Ralph cannot do anything but mourn, especially because his mother was manipulative in the way that she interacted with him and crossed a lot of boundaries and made him very dependent on her. And Abby is aware of that. She has mother issues of her own and is also very obsessed with becoming a mother. It gets to the point where Ralph believes that his mother's ghost is haunting the house. So Abby takes things into her own hands, trying to fix everything for her husband. This is so weird. For some reason, I feel like Milkfed and this are comparable titles, even though they are in different genres. Just some of the themes of toxic moms, similar. Also dealing with eating. Both of these have very similar themes of eating and consumption, which is so weird to have in common. Number one, the writing style. The creepy writing style. So this is like Milkfed's weirdness turned up into creepy. Just from the very first pages, you get that Abby is like an unsettled person on top of the terrible, weird things that are going on around her. One of the fun things about horror is that you don't necessarily know what kind of horror you're going to get, and I went into this thinking it was going to be one kind, and it turned out to be a better kind, which I was so happy with. And I liked how far into the horror it suddenly swerved into. Like, that was really fun. I think there were some sections that were a little bit repetitive, but other than that, really enjoyed it. This isn't a new favorite horror of all time, and I certainly don't know who to recommend this to other than people who like horror, but I ended up giving this a really solid 4.25. So fucking weird. And the last book that I read this year was I Kissed Shara Wheeler by Casey McQuiston. So I read One Last Stop last year, and I really liked it. I was worried that it might talk down to a YA audience, like some adult writers who try to write YA, but I should never have doubted Casey. I should never have done it. I will never do it again, because this is fucking fantastic. Along with Milkfed, this can make my favorite books of the year, and I won't stop thinking about this cast. It really blew One Last Stop out of the water for me, and I will be reading Red, White, and Royal Blue sometime soon. Shara Wheeler is this small town in Alabama's favorite girl. She is the richest girl in town, the principal's daughter. She's in line for valedictorian. She's beautiful and kind, and everyone loves her. She has a boyfriend who's the quarterback. The next door neighbor boy is in love with her, and he's a musician. And Chloe Green, our main character, is her competition for valedictorian. Right before this book starts, Shara kisses the boy next door and Chloe and drops off the face of the earth, leaving letters behind for those two and her boyfriend. And it is the three of them, the unlikely group, coming together to do this crazy scavenger hunt to try to find her. But it turns out that there are multiple motives for this scavenger hunt and bringing these people together. I loved this so much. Casey McQuiston did such a good job of making realistic characters who aren't always making the best decisions. Like, they're not always 100% good people, and that makes them realistic. I really like the representation. Chloe as a bi main character, and she's an outwardly queer woman trying to make her way in this extremely conservative town and finding more people who are starting to question their own sexuality and gender. I love that Chloe has a great relationship with her moms. The only thing I didn't love is when Chloe starts neglecting her old friends for new things in the scavenger hunt. That was the only thing that I thought was a little bit cliche about this, but I think that everything was resolved with that, and all of the different resolutions was done in a way that made this unrealistic plot line realistic and made everybody feel like real people, and everybody is sweet and loves each other, and this just made my heart so happy. And I love the main relationship so much. So much. There's so many authors out there who cannot write realistic dialogue for young people, but Casey McQuiston knows Gen Z humor, knows how young people talk to each other, and it just really makes it so much more of an enjoyable experience because it is real to young people of today, which makes me sound like an old person. I'm 21. I will never doubt Casey McQuiston again. This made me so happy, and I want to reread it over and over and over again. So no question about it, I give this a solid 5 stars. Anyway, those are all of the books that I read in December, and this is the only one I have to show for it. But please let me know what you ended up reading at the end of the year. Did anything that you read right at the end make it onto your best of the year? Because I think mine did, and I'm glad that I waited. If you would like to find me or my book club anywhere, you can check out my link in the description, where I also have a link where you can get your first book of the month for only $5. I use book of the month, and I really enjoy the service. I am not getting paid to say that, but I do get a free book if you use the link. Again, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one, where I'm talking about my favorite books of the year. Ah!